Imagine this, it's the winter of 1942. You're asleep in your home somewhere in Calcutta, maybe in Shambazar or in Hathibagan. The streets are dark, deliberately dark, because the city administration has received ominous reports that Calcutta may be the next target of the Imperial Japanese Air Force. And then the sirens go off. You don't know if it's only a drill, and you don't know where to run. And high above, somewhere in the black December sky, you hear a growing buzz. A massive formation of Imperial Japanese bombers are flying over the city. Then the explosions begin. The ground trembles. Windows rattle. The city shakes under the force of the blasts. This actually happened, and today almost nobody talks about it. In this video, we are going back to a forgotten chapter in India's history that most Indians have never even heard of, when Japanese warplanes rained bombs on Calcutta. To understand why Japan targeted Calcutta, we need to zoom way out and look at what was happening across Asia in those terrifying months of late 1941 and early 1942. On the 7th of December 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and dragged America into the war. But what most people don't realize is that on the same day, Japan also launched invasions across Southeast Asia. Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, all simultaneously. It was one of the most audacious military gambits in history, and they didn't stop. Winston Churchill called the fall of Singapore on 15th of February 1942 the worst disaster and the largest capitulation in British history. Around 130,000 Allied troops were captured. Within weeks, Japan also had taken the Dutch East Indies, what is now Indonesia, and much of Burma and the Philippines. An empire the European colonizers had taken centuries to build was dismantled in a matter of weeks. Then came Burma. The main purpose of the Japanese invasion was to cut the Burma Road, the one remaining land supply route into China. They succeeded. By May of 1942, all of Burma was in Japanese hands. The British and the Chinese ground troops were pushed right to the Indian border. And now, Calcutta was on the front line. But why was Calcutta specifically so critical? Why not Bombay? Or why not Delhi? Because of geography and because of what was flowing through the city. Calcutta was at the heart of the Allied war effort in Asia. It was through the port of Calcutta that supplies for the Allied forces flowed, transported by rail to the troops facing the Japanese along the Burmese border. Weapons, ammunition, food, medicine, and fuel all landed at the Khidirpur docks and moved northeast by train towards the war front. But that's not all. There was a second supply mission running through Calcutta. One so dangerous it had its own legendary name in military history. Flying the Hump. The Hump was the name given by Allied pilots to the eastern end of the Himalayan mountain range over which they flew military transport aircrafts from India to China to resupply the Chinese war effort. With the Burma Road cut off, the only way to keep China fighting was to fly supplies over the highest mountain range on earth. It grew into an operation of 700 planes, supported by 84,000 military personnel, flying a 1,000-mile round trip and delivering up to 10,000 tons of supplies a month, with a plane crossing the hump every 2 minutes. General Wedemeyer, commander of the US forces in China, called it the foremost and by far the most dangerous, difficult, and historic achievement of the entire war. And the base for much of this was Calcutta. The city and northeastern India had become central to operations supplying China, at one point making Calcutta one of the busiest military aviation hubs in Asia. So here was Japan's calculation. To defeat the Allies in Asia, they needed to stop supplies reaching both the Burma front and China. And almost all of those supplies moved through one city, Calcutta. Since Japan had lost naval dominance after Midway in June 1942 and could no longer control the Indian Ocean, the only way left to cut off those supplies was through aerial bombing. So they planned an attack on Calcutta to disrupt the supply chain. Now there was another layer to this story, one that makes it uniquely Indian and worth holding in mind as we get into the raids themselves. At the very same time Japan was planning to bomb Indian cities, Japan was also backing the movement led by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and the Indian National Army. Many Indians saw Japan as a potential liberator from British rule. Others viewed Japan as just another imperial power pursuing its own ambitions. So this is the strange contradiction sitting underneath everything that follows. Japanese bombs were about to fall on Indian civilians in Calcutta, while at the same moment, some Indian freedom fighters were also cooperating with Japan to achieve freedom from British rule. History is really simple, and wartime India was full of such contradictions. Let's keep that in mind because now the bombs start falling. The first wave of attacks had initially been planned for December 5th, 1942. Japan's 7th Air Brigade had been assigned the job. The pilots had even rehearsed the operation in occupied Malaya. But before attacking Calcutta, the Japanese tried something clever first. As a decoy, they hit airfields in the Chittagong area, trying to lure Allied fighters away from Calcutta. It worked. While attention was focused elsewhere, the real operation was already underway. Calcuttans had no idea what kind of force was about to be unleashed on the city. Then, on the cold night of 20th December 1942, the Imperial Japanese Air Force finally attacked. A huge swarm of bombers appeared over Calcutta. The city had no proper radar, no significant air defense. The Japanese knew this. They came in at night, which meant the bombers were almost impossible to intercept. Bombs began falling on the city. One left a massive crater right opposite the Great Eastern Hotel on Old Courthouse Street. Other bombs hit the industrial areas and the dock zones. The Central Telegraph Office was affected. Hundreds were killed or injured in this first raid alone. And then, on Christmas Eve, 24th December 1942, they came back. This time, the bombs landed around Dalhousie Square, Mango Lane, and Bentinck Street. There was something particularly cruel about bombing a city on Christmas Eve. For many Calcuttans, this was the moment reality sank in. The first raid could be dismissed as an isolated attack. The second raid could not. It was clear the city had to brace for many more. By December 23rd, the governor of Bengal, John Herbert, was writing to the viceroy in panic. He reported what he called a considerable exodus from the city. Workers had completely disappeared from the dock areas. The railways were overwhelmed. Special trains had to be added just to carry the thousands trying to flee from the city. An estimated 350,000 people left Calcutta in the aftermath of those first raids. Our grandparents' generation, the Bhadralok, the working class, everybody, they ran. But Calcutta did not simply lie down. The Allied forces rushed to reinforce the city's defenses. Hurricane fighter aircrafts were moved to Calcutta. Emergency airfields were literally constructed overnight, including one right on Red Road in the heart of the city. Trees, obelisks, and lampposts were ripped out to make space for Spitfires to take off. Anti-aircraft gun batteries were positioned across the city. Barrage balloons were deployed across key locations. The idea was simple. If a Japanese bomber flew low enough, it would get tangled in the cables and crash. Important buildings across the city, including the Victoria Memorial Hall, were painted black to protect them from nighttime air raids. The balloons worked. Forced to fly higher, the Japanese became far less accurate. Many of their bombs started falling harmlessly in open fields on the Maidan. Then, in January of 1943, Bristol Beaufighter night fighters equipped with radar arrived. By the end of January, these aircrafts were so effective at intercepting Japanese bombers in the dark that Japan actually stopped its raids on Calcutta for a while. By the middle of 1943, it seemed the danger had passed. The city began breathing again. But then, relief would prove temporary. The worst was still to come. On 5th of December 1943, the Japanese returned and changed tactics completely. Previous raids had been at night. This one came in daylight. The Japanese flew all the way from the occupied Andaman Islands across the Bay of Bengal in broad daylight and with fighter escorts. The attack on the Khidirpur docks came in 2 waves, 1 hour apart. The Allied defenses were caught completely off guard. Radar systems failed to detect the incoming aircrafts on time. Spitfires and Hurricanes were scrambled, but it was too late. 86 bombs rained down on the Khidirpur docks. 9 sheds were destroyed. Ships were damaged. A floating crane was hit. 15 barges were set ablaze. The hydrogen generation plant for barrage balloons was destroyed, taking out 6 of the protective balloons. The Indian government officially announced 167 civilians killed and 435 injured. Other estimates put the death toll at anywhere between 335 and 500 people, most of them dock workers. These were not soldiers. They were working class people, the invisible backbone of the war effort, who died in a war that was never supposed to touch them. After this raid, dock operations dropped sharply, and the human trauma outlasted the physical damage. Today, very few people in India or even Kolkata know that their city was bombed during the Second World War, partly because the attacks were overshadowed by larger events. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed millions. The independence movement accelerated. Partition transformed the region forever. Compared to those tragedies, bombing raids faded from public memory. Yet, for the people who lived through them, the experience was unforgettable. Air raid sirens, blackouts, bomb shelters, and the fear of enemy aircrafts overhead. The Japanese continued sporadic raids into 1944, the last one on 24th of December. as if completing a grim symmetry with the Christmas Eve attack 2 years earlier. But by then, Allied advances had forced Japan to redeploy its aircrafts elsewhere, and Calcutta was no longer a priority target. The bombing, despite everything, had failed. Japan simply didn't have the resources to sustain a campaign powerful enough to cripple Calcutta's port. The city's defenses proved resilient, and the sheer scale of Allied supplies flowing through Calcutta was too massive to be stopped by aerial raids alone. Calcutta, like always, endured. And in doing so, it helped the Allies win the war in the East. But here's the thing that stays with me. Those 350,000 people who fled, those dock workers who died at Khidirpur, the families who blacked out their windows every night because the city administration had told them to, not knowing if the next morning would come. The grandmothers who told their grandchildren years later about the howl of the sirens and the darkness of the city. This is a story about Calcutta, about the ordinary Bhadralok of Calcutta who lived through something extraordinary, something terrifying, and somehow kept going. And the least we can do is remember this story. There are so many chapters in the history of India that have been buried, and it's on us to dig them back up. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did you know about this episode from India's history? If you are from Kolkata, did any of your grandparents ever mention the blackouts, the sirens, or the terror they had to endure? Like the video if you learned something new today. And subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more such stories. See you in the next one. Thank you. Thanks for watching.